Greetings. Today we're looking at Paris, specifically how Paris developed around transportation innovations. My name is Benjamin Peterson and this is my colleague Carlos Valenzuela. Paris began as a very agricultural place. The River Seine provided grounds for fertile soil, and Paris began as a way to exchange goods and, like any town, get from one place to the next. But come medieval times, Paris got a little bit more dense, and it was fortified by a strong wall. The Seine brought in a lot of trade, and Paris was a cultural hub. Universities, churches, illegal book trades, it began to be quite the place. But it wasn't that large. Up until the 1600s, you could get from one side to the other in about 30 minutes. This photo is from 1607. You can start to see horse-drawn carriages in porters. Porters were individuals, typically from the lower class, who would carry around your belongings. Now, Paris was still quite small, meaning maybe 2 miles diameter, and so it was feasible to get around by foot, and having porters was a very useful way to get your stuff carried around. But most people continued to walk. Only the wealthier individuals could afford carriages or horses. But come the 1800s, you start to see a lot more public transportation. On the left-hand side, this image is an omnibus. And what it was an early form of just that, a bus. It was offered from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and the government set rates so that it was relatively affordable. On the right-hand side, you can really see Paris start to resemble somewhat of a modern form. Even though these narrow streets are not the same as the wide boulevards we have currently, you can start to recognize it. This photo is from 1872, and as you can see, Paris was still not that organized. Despite the omnibuses, most of it was still smelly and not that pleasant of a place to be in. With Napoleon on the rise, Paris was really a central place, and it was important for Napoleon that it was a place that people wanted to be and reflected modernity and power. That said, Napoleon III teamed up with an architect, Haussmann, who vowed to change the way Paris looked by rebuilding it, rebuilding aqueducts, creating sewage systems, and more public spaces that reflected the full power of France. As you can see in this painting, France is really beginning to be a socialized place, and people care about fashion, they care about modernity, and these wide boulevards created by Haussmann are being used by thousands of carriages, and people are now more social. They're saying hello in the streets. This is a lot different from that dirty picture you saw a couple slides ago. This photo is from around 1906, and you can see that the omnibuses are now being replaced by tramways, which are basically similar, except for these buses are now laid on tracks. As well, the streets are being laid with stone, which means that, again, the city is becoming less dirty. Now, this is an artistic rendering, but it shows how the city, as of around the 1920s, really picks up steam. It's a place that is full of life, full of economic activity. And as we'll see, that's really what the modern Paris looks like. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but these long boulevards can be attributed to Haussmann and his vision for Paris as a place to get quickly from one side to the other, to engage in trade, commerce, and entertainment.
By the early 1900s, the first subway route was completed. By the 1920s, the core of the system was finished. Throughout the First World War, the subway system was used by the French army as a bunker. By the 1930s, the subway had extended into the suburbs. The modern metro is mostly underground and is 214 kilometers long. It consists of 303 stations with 62 transfers and 16 lines that run through the center of Paris and connects to the outskirts of the city. From the year 1968 to 2006, Paris grew by nearly 3 million people. This was accompanied by improvements of commuter rail and regional express rail. Studies show that areas connected to the RER experienced a 9% higher growth in employment.
Starting in the 1970s, the government started building more highways, which allowed Paris to become more suburbanized and have higher amounts of employment and economic activity. Much like American cities, Paris has an extensive highway network which people commute to work every day on. Even though Paris has a greater network of rail, there's a lot of problems, such as pollution, that the city is trying to tackle. It's no coincidence that the Paris Climate Accords are based out of Paris. As you can see in this photo, pollution is a big problem, and the government's trying to do a lot to mitigate it. For example, once a year, Paris establishes a car-free day, wherein cars are outlawed from the city. Additionally, the policies in place are starting to remove cars from important cities, for example, on the quayside next to the Seine River. The goal is to make Paris a more pedestrian-friendly place. So ideally, we'd have less smog and a more enjoyable environment to live in.